Had a really great question on one of my other videos that was asking why Star Wars is not science fiction. Well, there was more to it than that. You can go look for it. Anyway, it made me realize that as a literature nerd and a sci-fi fantasy nerd, I am in a unique position to explain how these two are different and a bunch of cool stuff based on the literary aspects and on the media aspects that a lot of people may not necessarily know. And a lot of people think, okay, sci-fi is spaceships and fantasy is swords, and that's it. But that's not really true. Because there is sci-fi that's swords, and there's fantasy that is in the future. The major difference between the two genres is not really necessarily. It's hard to define because there's lots of things that cross over, and a lot of people have trouble with that. Genres in general, before I even start a little bit on this, you have to realize there's no value judgment in this. Both sci-fi and fantasy can be great or can be bad. No genre is particularly better than any other. There are some that we like more. There are some that are more sophisticated, but there's not one that's better. It's kind of like with music. Country music is generally simpler, but that also means that it can affect you more and it can reach more people. And I say that specifically in lyrical structure and the chords involved. Even then, that's not always true because sometimes it can be incredibly complex. Anyway, so the major difference, in my opinion, between science fiction and fantasy is that science fiction asks a question. It's almost always, what would happen if this? What would happen if that? And fantasy is almost always the same story. And that's not a bad thing. Again, it's almost always the story of a chosen one character who is forgotten and lost and, comes up from nothing. This is called Campbell's monomyth, by the way. And Campbell's monomyth is the idea of this one chosen one going on the hero's journey. And the hero's journey is a whole other thing. It would take forever to explain. It's got 12 steps. I teach it pretty regularly. But the hero's journey is basically a fantasy construct about what this one character goes through to go from their initial lost nature to being who they're supposed to be, the hero. And it involves a lot of steps in the underworld and lots of symbolic stuff and mentors. Whereas science fiction almost always comes from the perspective of what would happen if? What if cats could talk? That's not even tech-based. It's just a what-if question. Now, usually the answer will be tech. Occasionally it will be magic, but as Arthur C. Clarke is famous for saying, any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. So that's the thing. Phones would seem magical to certain people, even though they are easily explainable tech to modern... Well, not easily explainable. They are explainable tech to modern people. Cars seem like magic to, people. That's the thing. The internet feels like magic to me because I grew up without it. The YouTube didn't start till 2005. I was already... it was 2000. Man, that can't be right. Yeah, anyway, in 2005, I was 27. So, yeah, I had already lived a significant portion of my life with nothing remotely like YouTube. And now, whenever I think of something old that I couldn't find anybody else that knew it existed, I can go on YouTube and go, ha, it's real. Just because nobody remembers it. Anyway, fantasy follows usually a certain structure, a literary structure, and sci-fi does as well. Sci-fi usually establishes, both of them establish a status quo at the beginning, but science fiction usually is asking, what will the new normal be? It's taking, this was normal, what if this new normal? And the end of sci-fi is usually that new normal. It can be character driven, but it often isn't. That's where it gets the genre fiction label from. But characters are important in all modern storytelling, but they aren't absolutely necessary for the structure, the literary structure of science fiction. Whereas in fantasy, you're kind of following this one character, usually, almost always one character, occasionally a band of four, but that's a whole different kettle of fish that I've covered in other videos. But they're going through something, and it's mostly to tell the story of them going through this thing. Excuse me. So fantasy, yes, usually involves swords and magic, but is also Campbell's monomyth. Whereas sci-fi is usually question, what if blah. What if we were on a planet with aliens and they had a substance that we wanted? What if cats could talk? What if Terminators from the future came back to secure the things that they wanted? Now, the Terminators are a really good example of something that is both, because Terminators are the story is the monomyth. I mean, it's been covered in multiple publications that he basically created himself, and all of his own stuff comes from that. Whereas in the most recent one, she created herself, and that's awesome. He just had himself, he hooked up a friend of his with his mom, and that's how he became an existence in the original one. But no, it's all about they're both, the Terminator is both fantasy and science fiction, because it has the what if question, but it also has the monomyth. So in response to the question, which I tried to respond to in text and didn't do very well, the reason that Star Wars is fantasy isn't because it doesn't have technology. It does. It has technology that we've never heard of, lightsabers, starships, hyperdrive, droids, all that stuff is technology. The reason that it's not really sci-fi is because A, it follows an entirely fantasy structure that the technology is just window dressing. It's not about the technology. It's not about the what if. It's not about what if we had swords made of light, because it doesn't answer that question. I mean, we just have swords made of light. It's just it's not even a question. But it also is tied to, and I didn't do any planning for this video. This is just me riffing. So if I missed some sort of detail, feel free to bring it to my attention. I'm happy to argue about it. No, the reason that it's fantasy is because George Lucas took a fantasy story, and the Hidden Fortress, and made it into a story set in a different setting. All he did was change the setting and some names, and admittedly the names are not terribly original or well thought out. But anyway, no, fantasy is more of a fairy tale, the logical progression of a fairy tale, and sci-fi is what if. That's the easiest, simplest way I can put it. I could write several papers on this and back up all my thoughts. I could. There's lots and lots of fascinating stuff out there being said about this, and maybe this should be a thesis proposal. I don't even know. But it's one of those things where I'm not sure it's important enough or specific enough that somebody would give me money to figure it out. I don't know. Worth looking at. If this one doesn't work out, then maybe I'll do that next. But yeah, if fantasy and sci-fi, they're basically two ways of doing the same thing. I mean, technically you could tell the Star Wars story as a soap opera. It works. It's got enough weird twists where it doesn't have to be in space. It could be on a ranch in Texas, or on a ranch in Montana. For some reason, because I come from Texas, everything's on a ranch. Or it could be, and then there was Dallas. But, it could be a cop drama set in New York, or New Jersey, or Boston, or Chicago, or LA. Those are all the cop drama places, right? There's New Orleans one, so yeah, maybe somewhere in Florida. Anyway, but yeah, so the story, there is a literary structure to science fiction and a literary structure to fantasy, and occasionally they cross over, and occasionally something is both. And some of the like prequels and stuff like that, those were proper science fiction. I would argue that Phantom Menace probably science fiction. Honestly, I'd say most of the prequel trilogy is science fiction. Because it's less about the story of the character. It really is less about the story of the characters, and that's not a bad thing. Than it is about like the major, because we already know where it's going. It's not getting us to the end. It's more about the what if, what happened to make him like this. So it is more of a question. I don't know. I should probably think about this before I randomly post videos, but, I hadn't posted videos in a while, and I'm trying to get back in the habit, so here we go. Cool. That is something that you may be interested in. I have no idea. Nice to see you all. I hope you're well, surviving in COVID crazy times. We're all just hoping that normal will ever be a thing again. So, chances are, if you're here, I love you, and I'll see you guys around. Take care.